In my free time, while I'm procrastinating or have nothing to do, I like to go onto Google Maps and explore random places all across the globe. While peeking around in the interesting metropolis of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, I stumbled upon this inconspicuous looking building. This is the McKenzie House, a small row residence built in the late 1850s for the influential journalist and politician William Lyon Mackenzie. The house has been through quite a lot in its 165 years of existence, from functioning as Mackenzie's living quarters for a few years until his passing, to narrowly being saved from demolition, and finally being bought by the city of Toronto, where it was promptly given its current purpose, functioning as a museum for the city during the Victorian Age. But in my mind, the most interesting chapter of this building's history pertains to a certain event that went down there in June 1960. You see, the McKenzie House has some spooky secrets lurking around in its vast history. Whispers of paranormal activity ran prevalent throughout the building's existence. There was once a point in time where you couldn't bring up the house in a casual conversation without someone mentioning, "Oh yeah, that place is haunted." Regardless of how true these rumors were, Toronto Telegram reporter Aubrey Weiss and the Archdeacon from the Church of the Holy Trinity wanted to do something about it. This led to them carrying out a live, televised exorcism on the CBC, which hasn't been seen since it first aired. Today, I not only want to document this unique lost media mystery, but the interesting story behind the McKenzie House and its namesake historical figurehead. When I heard about this from famed iceberg creator and good friend Equirep, I knew I just had to chase the opportunity, so special thanks to them for the idea. And now, cue the scary lightning strikes or bats or whatever, because we're getting ghostly again. So, who is William Lyon Mackenzie? And what's the deal with his house? To answer that first question, he was, let's just say, quite the dude. Note that you will experience the perils of early 18th century Canadian politics during this stretch of our adventure, with some rebellions mixed in to excite you when you inevitably get bored. I will try to simplify things as much as possible since his life and legacy is not the main focus, but it is still worth getting a surface level knowledge of to understand the location of our story. William Lyon Mackenzie was born in Scotland on March 12, 1795. His father, Daniel, died a few months before he was born, leading his mother to raise him alone and in a traditional manner adherent to the Presbyterian Church. In 1813, William moved to Alf, Scotland to assist her in opening a general store. Also around this time, he fathered an illegitimate child, nearly got kicked out of his congregation until he paid a fine, moved to southern England, became a chronic gambler, moved to the still very British Canada in 1820 to become a journalist, married his wife, then proceeded to have 13 more children with her. None of that was a joke, that was all very, very true. He worked various odd jobs until moving to Queenston, a town near Niagara Falls, where he proceeded to buy his own printing press and founded a newspaper called the Colonial Advocate. The paper would grow to be quite influential as it was critical of the Family Compact, a group of elite aristocrats who controlled most important aspects of government and the economy in what is now a part of the modern-day province of Ontario, then known as Upper Canada. To say that the Compact was not thrilled about the growing popularity of his paper would be a great understatement. Once he moved his operations to the growing city of York, no, not New York, just York, members of the Compact destroyed his printing press and harassed his family and friends, in what would become known as the Types Riot in 1826. Despite his newspaper business coming to a screeching halt, this gave Mackenzie the opportunity to jump the gun and head straight into politics, getting elected to Parliament in 1828 to represent York. In 1834, York formally changed its name to Toronto, with Mackenzie becoming the city's first mayor, only to lose the job a year later. But just because he had been a part of an organized government didn't mean that his anti-elite sentiments went away, and in fact, they were only strengthened after Britain had rejected any reforms for Upper Canada. Rebellious attitudes started to take place, and if anyone were to take them by the horns, it would be Mackenzie. This would lead him to plan the Upper Canada Rebellion, an insurgency against the government which would last from 1837 to 1838. Along with the Lower Canada Rebellion, their goal was to gain more independence and ability to gain major political reform from the Brits and allow them to become a single, unified state. Mackenzie was even able to gather a like-minded militia from the United States to help him out, continuously attacking Lower Canada for about a year in what would become known as the Patriot War. While the rebellion was aptly crushed by those crumpet eaters, the events that would follow allowed Lower and Upper Canada to unify as a single entity in 1841 as the Province of Canada. This subsequently allowed for Canada to gain nearly complete political independence from the Brits in 1867. But this history had not yet been written. For now, McKenzie would self-exile to the United States, where he started yet another newspaper and was promptly found guilty of violating the US's neutrality laws. He spent a little over 10 months in a Rochester prison until being pardoned by President Van Buren on May 10, 1840. His newspaper, McKenzie's Gazette, continued through his sentence. After being released, McKenzie denounced any other insurgency movements against Lower Canada and stayed in the US for several years, being granted citizenship in 1843. Things did start to cool down between Britain and its possession in the Great White North, however, and thus McKenzie was granted amnesty and moved back to Canada in 1849. He made a grand return to politics, this time serving as a legislator in Haldimand County in southern Ontario for 8 years, where he did some stuff outside of the scope of this video. But you know what isn't outside of the scope of this video? That's right, it's finally time we get to the focal point, the McKenzie House. After McKenzie resigned from the legislature in 1858, the Homestead Fund was set up by some of his good friends to financially support him for the rest of his life. One of the first things initiated under this fund was the construction of 3 quaint Georgian-style townhouses at 82 Bond Street in Toronto. Our good friend William would take residence in the middle one, but unfortunately his tenure there would be short-lived. His health would quickly deteriorate over the next several years, and he would pass away in the second-floor bedroom of the house on August 28, 1861, at the age of 66. After McKenzie's death, the house would change hands several times. The property first went to the city of Toronto, who seized it after certain financial obligations were not met. In 1864, the house was bought by Toronto paper magnate John Taylor, who allowed McKenzie's family to live there rent-free. The house would then be subsequently bought by the daughter of William Lyon McKenzie, Isabel McKenzie King, where his children and widow would continue to reside until 1871. And then it went into sort of a limbo state for over 60 years, with the middle townhouse narrowly being saved from demolition by the city of Toronto in 1936. This was, at least in part, because of Mackenzie's grandson, William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was Prime Minister of Canada at the time and understood its historical significance. In 1960, the house was officially deeded to the city and promptly turned into a museum to document and preserve the original Victorian character of Toronto. Despite being swallowed by the high-rises and built environment of modern Toronto, and being mere blocks away from some of the city's most iconic attractions, the house remains a unique slice of history for those who stumble upon it. But what about the other side of the building's history? The more paranormal and spooky veil it put on? Well, the McKenzie House does have quite the ghostly history. Reports upon reports of paranormal activity inside of the house skyrocketed after the McKenzie family left, when various caretakers and roomers worked and lived on the premises. The most common of which were of Mackenzie's aforementioned daughter haunting the premises with her residence on the second floor. Mackenzie himself, who remember did die in the house, along with his wife, have also been cited spirits. With faucets magically turning on, toilets being flushed, creaking floorboards, the sounds of a typewriter, and the spontaneous playing of the piano in the parlor, it had all the signs of a truly haunted location. The most famous story tells of a former caretaker of the home, Mrs. Edmonds, who claimed that she was awoken by a soft touch on the shoulder. She then spotted a lady bending over her, looking into her face before vanishing into thin air. A few weeks went by and she once again made similar claims. This time the lady drew back her hand and slapped her in the face before vanishing once again. Whether or not these claims of hauntings were true, it's the whispers of urban legends like this that drew the attention of some major mass media players in the city. Yes, this is the point in which we turn to the lost media aspect of our story. Note that many of the details surrounding what I'm about to tell you are a bit sketchy. This is one of those lost media legends where its information is still so scattered that it can be hard to pick up the pieces and find out where people got their sources. So I'll make sure to imply when to take things with a grain of salt. Sometime in mid-June 1960, the now-defunct local newspaper Toronto Telegram wanted to pull off what could either be described as a deliberate publicity stunt or an event to cultivate the masses for the means of gathering interest around the new museum. According to some sources, when the property was given to the city of Toronto, there was a request for inventory of all the artifacts that were in the house at the time, and at the bottom of the list were the words, "One ghost, exorcised." To fulfill this prophecy, the Telegram got one of their reporters, Aubrey Weiss, teamed up with the Archdeacon from the Church of the Holy Trinity, John Walker, to perform a live televised exorcism of the McKenzie House on the CBC, Canada's national broadcaster. The ghost reportedly exorcised was that of William Lyon McKenzie himself. After the broadcast concluded, critical response was mixed. While many were simply intrigued by the events that glowed on television screens across the north, some dismissed it as a simple publicity stunt for the newspaper, not the least of which was the Telegram's main rival, the Toronto Star. Ghost Ghastly Hoax Typewriter Squeaks was a headline featured in the Star on Tuesday, June 25th, 1960. The story goes on about how the house was never haunted, with the mysterious sounds instead coming from a, and I quote this from the paper, eager publicist typewriter. It goes on, constantly throwing shade at the Telegram for creating all of this ghost fervor. In the last sentence, they go on to state, Toronto's ghostly tale turned into a ghastly hoax. Whether it was a thinly veiled publicity stunt, or an earnest attempt to rid the house of a spirit, no one at the CBC seemed all that eager to ever acknowledge the exorcism ever again. 1960 was after the invention of various means to preserve television broadcasts, such as kinescoping and magnetic videotape, but it was still firmly in the era of mass tape-wiping practices, where loads of television became permanently lost. Whether or not the tape of the event was saved is a topic of continued discussion. From what I can observe on the outside, CBC, being the good-natured Canadians that they are, seemed to be better than the networks in the US and UK about preservation, but they still weren't perfect. I found a link on a Reddit thread about the topic where you can search into a database of CBC's archives, but I had no such luck in finding anything pertaining to the broadcast. And just like that, the exorcism at the McKenzie House remains a simple footnote in its vast history. But there are still some intriguing questions to bring to the table. Did the exorcism work? Does the spirit of William Lyon McKenzie still haunt his namesake home? Does any spirit still haunt the property for that matter? While the answers of these depend on if you even believe in ghosts, it's important to note that the amount of urban legends surrounding the house are noted to have gone down drastically even as it was open to the public. While you'll still occasionally hear anecdotes about spirits being present and ghost tours still making their claims, the urban legends are nowhere near the level they were at in the 1940s and 50s. Makes you think, huh? In any case, the confusing and scattered history behind the exorcism is very indicative of William Lyon McKenzie's legacy in the modern day. Was he a hero or a terrorist? Was he an enemy to the crown or a friend to democracy? Your answer is dependent on your own beliefs. The same goes for the inconspicuous building that he resided in during his final years. Is it haunted? Was it ever haunted? What were the effects of the exorcism? Are ghosts even real? Even today, in our age of information, it's questions like these that prevail over the various aspects of our story. But one question tops them all in my lost media-centered psyche. What happened to Canada's lost televised exorcism? Answer it, if you dare. This has been BrayBray, thanks for watching, and remember that Buff Yoshi is forever supreme.